Hey gang, welcome back. So this is Crazy Welder, and today I'm going to be talking about a video that I wanted to do for a while now, but I haven't been able to do it because I just haven't had too much time. So what you can hopefully see in front of me is I've got a Vigica headset which you can put your smartphone into, and the reason for this is because in today's video I'm going to be talking about getting your own VR set up in such a way that it doesn't cost you nearly as much as an Oculus Rift. As you all know, the Oculus Rift is a fairly expensive piece of equipment. I think nowadays it's going for something like $600. Now the closer alternatives to it that are out there are pretty much in the same range, sometimes maybe a little bit cheaper. Now, there are a number of ways that you can set this up. Obviously, the Oculus Rift is a very superior device in the sense that it uses USB 3 and it uses HDMI. So the video quality is going to be pretty good. With this setup, you're looking at a price maximum of maybe $75, but you're going to sacrifice some video quality and have a little bit of latency compared with the Oculus. But you can potentially set this up in all kinds of custom ways that you wouldn't be able to with the Oculus, and it's also going to cost you a lot cheaper. So to kind of break this down for you guys, the headset that I'm using is this Vigica headset, which costs about $27 to $28 on Amazon, really cheap. And as you can see, it's a fairly good device. You've got a really good head strap here, you've got padding for your eyes, you can totally adjust the aperture, and you can adjust the IPD, which is great. You can move these lenses forward and back, which is also great because that means it's totally customizable to the user's eyes. And the great thing about this is that you can just take out this little piece of plastic right here and fit your phone into it, and I'll show you guys how that's done in a little bit. But basically it's Oculus type stuff for about $30, and you can go and buy the Gear VR, for example, from Samsung, and you potentially could have a better experience going that way, but the Gear VR by itself is going to cost more than this whole setup, which is why I'm trying to break it down and make it much simpler for you guys, because I tried it recently and it worked out pretty good for me so far. So what else are you going to need with this setup, you're wondering? Well, there's a couple of other things in addition to having a smartphone, which is that you're going to need some apps. Now, I've tried a bunch of different ones. I've tried Caney, which you can find in the Google App Store, and Caney seems to be fairly slow. It appears to have quite a bit of latency. I tried Trinus VR, which in wireless mode did not work quite as well as I expected, but over USB 2, which is what my phone supports, it works quite decently. Now, the other one that's out there, which is the one that I'm actually using, is Kino VR or Kino Console, which is a free app, or you could pay for more features, but ultimately I ended up paying so that I could have a slightly better VR experience, but that one seems to be working the best, and it works wirelessly. So those are the apps that you're going to need. They'll come on the Google Play Store. Some of them are free. I believe Trinus is the only one that's not free on the list, but it's also technically the most difficult one to set up, and I'll show you why in a little bit. But before I get there, the last piece of software that you're going to need is going to be Tridef 3D, and I'll put all the links to this stuff in the description so you guys can kind of view it. And basically the way it works is you get the apps on your phone, you get the apps on your computer, then you end up running the app from your computer and then on your phone so that the two of them can connect, and the connection is over a wireless network. And so in my house it's an entirely AC network. Wireless and anything below that will not handle this at all, and I would highly recommend that you go and get an actual range extender if you don't already have one. That will make it a lot easier, or you simply connect your computer to the nearest router, nearest wireless router, so that you have it on that same general network. That will make things a lot easier for you. And again, I'll go into this into more detail a little bit further on. But the idea is you pay $40 for Tridef, which is the most expensive application of everything that you see here. So the total runs you, if you're going to buy Tridef and you're going to buy, for example, Kino console, which is also around something like $7, add that to the cost of this head mount, and you're going to be looking at about $75 for your VR setup, which honestly, considering everything, is not that bad, because you're paying essentially less than a sixth of what the Oculus setup would cost you, and you get a pretty good experience overall. Now, there are a couple of other apps that do 3D. I believe there's Vario and something like Warp X, I believe, but I tried both of them, and the problem with Vario 3D is that it currently does not have support for DirectX 11 games, and a lot of the games in my library that I want to play right now are DirectX 11, so that's definitely not going to work for me so well. And there is also the WarpX one, which also costs $40, just like Tridef, but it has a much smaller support of games that it does than Tridef, and there aren't as many user profiles set up for different games, so that one's going to be a bit more difficult to use. I would highly recommend Tridef over it in general. So the overall setup here is really actually fairly simple, and I'll show you guys how this works with my phone. So I've got a case on my phone, but I'm just going to go ahead and take this off real quick so you can kind of see how this setup is going to run. It takes me a little bit of time to get this going here, so I apologize about that in advance. So I've got my phone open right now, and unfortunately I don't have a good way of showing you guys my phone screen. I wish I had a better way of recording it than over the camera, so again, my apologies there. But you've got this app, so you launch the app, and as you can see, my computer is on there, so I'm gonna go ahead and put in my password here real quick. Alright, so as you guys can hopefully see, what I have going on right now is my computer screen, but it's running in VR mode. Now, this is only available on the paid application, unfortunately, but like I said, you don't actually really want to run your stuff in this mode because you're going to want to use Tridef's functionality for that reason. And so the way that this works is I'll go into my computer share shortly, and I'm going to launch this app called Tridef Ignition to show you guys how it works. So the next step here is you take your Vigica display and you basically put your smartphone into this, and you want to make sure that the center line here is lined up with roughly where the separation of the screens is. You can just kind of move that, and all you do is you simply put your phone in here and you're good to go. You can now see the screens just as you would on an Oculus Rift, and you've got yourself a connection to the computer going. So I'm going to explain how Tridef works and how to launch your games using Tridef. It's really quite simple, probably one of the simplest things to do out there as far as VR is concerned. I've tried a bunch of other apps, as I've said before, and they just weren't working nearly as good as this one. Okay guys, so here's how we're going to do this. As you can see, I've got a number of applications that we're going to need to launch. So the first one we're going to open here is Kino Console. Now, in this particular case, I've already set my password, so that no other computers can connect to, or no other phones can connect to your computer while you're doing this. In this particular case, my computer name is Spectre, and this is the external IP address that you're going to type into your phone app to get all of that going. It's actually really not as hard as it seems. Basically, you launch the app on your phone, and then you end up inputting your computer name and your IP address, and it connects. Now, in order for this to work, you want to make sure that you are connected to the same Wi-Fi network in the house, and so your phone and your computer are going to have to be on the same one. And I cannot stress enough how important it is that your house has an AC wireless network. That's wireless AC, because wireless N is just not going to provide the speeds that you're looking for. And ultimately, it would be ideal if you use a range extender, as that will give you the fastest speeds available. Even using USB 3.0 and a little adapter that I have, I'm also unable to get stable speeds. So the next video I'm going to do in regards to this is an update on how it works when I do have a basically wireless kind of bridge almost, because currently I do not have one of those, and I did try this out at a friend's house and it worked much better using a range extender as opposed to using just an adapter specifically. So that's the first step here. Now the next one is I have Tridef 3D here, but what I'm going to do is launch Tridef Ignition instead. So there goes Tridef. And so I'm going to keep trying it for now. I haven't paid for the full version just yet. And as you can see, here is Alien Isolation. So all I have to do now is go ahead and launch this game. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And what you'll see it do is when it launches the game, after just a little bit, it takes some time for it to get going. It's going to open it up and have two separate screens going at the same time. And the reason for this is that it's going to create a side-by-side 3D image, and this 3D image is then going to be something you can view on your phone using your head-mounted display. Now, there are some issues with this, namely in the fact that if you actually look at this, unlike the Oculus game support, what's noticeable in this particular case is that the image is not warped properly, so it's going to give you some aberrations and it's not going to give you the best kind of 3D that's available. But this is also because my computer screen does not support 3D, and as a result of that I can't actually launch the game in proper 3D. I'm basically software locked and hardware locked at the same time, and for me the 3D is not quite as good. But there are a couple of things that you want to actually take care of before you even get into the game and do this, and I'm going to talk about that here shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of the game really quickly to show you what I mean. There are a couple of settings that you need to keep in mind. So as you can see, you've got a bunch of different options here. You've got different profiles, and as such you're able to check out where everything is as far as where the game's exe is, what kind of command line arguments you want, and also settings for 3D as well. So what you want to take a look at here obviously is, enabling 3D, decreasing or increasing the scene depth. That's going to basically move objects that are close to you a little bit further out, so you can have the sense of 3D. You can also mess around with the percentage in front of you for your view, and you can also decrease it or increase it. That one's pretty good, but I haven't found it to be working too well in the side-by-side view personally. I think this would work better if you do have an Oculus Rift, or if the images were actually warped. I feel like it creates too many aberrations and it looks a little bit off. The custom focus is almost sort of like the equivalent of basically depth that you would get in the game. So if you have an option within the game for something like custom depth, meaning that certain objects that are further away are going to be out of focus and the ones closer to you are going to be in focus, that's basically the same thing. Now what you also have here is a laser sight. So this is something that turns on a reticle within the game. If you are having issues with the reticle, what happens occasionally, such as in the case of Syndicate, is that you're going to notice that objects that are 2D, for example 2D gun sights, are going to be rendered improperly, which makes it really difficult to aim. And so as a result, having a laser sight is quite significant there, because you'll actually be able to tell what you're doing much easier. Now there are a couple of other things such as image stretch and image overscan. This mostly applies to if you have a monitor that's not a standard 16:9 type monitor, and the screen is being displayed weird on your phone as a result. Sometimes this can help, sometimes not. It also depends on what type of app you're using. I have found that if I'm using, for example, Caney does not seem to like being put into proper VR mode, and as a result it's good to stretch the image. But Caney, again, as I've said, is also quite slow, so it's not going to work so well for you there. Now there are more things here that are kind of important. The on-screen display is basically going to give you all of these little shortcuts so you'll be able to view them and use them in-game. It's fairly easy to use and navigate. Now, Power 3D is another one of those options for those of you that want to increase your performance, and this is really where the specs for something like this come into play. My computer is actually not ideal for running this type of 3D, mostly because I only have one graphics card and it has one GPU on board. Having a dual GPU card or having a dual graphics card is actually going to be very advantageous to you in the case of running 3D, because when you're using regular 3D, your graphics card is having to render the image twice, so it is effectively almost running the game twice, which obviously means you're going to have a pretty serious impact on performance. Now, you can generally lower the resolution that the game is running at, you can lower some of the settings that you have, but that's not an ideal situation, because obviously when you do that you're going to have a decrease in visual fidelity, and the whole idea of this is to be a really immersive experience. Now, so what Power 3D does is it basically takes images, depth images from the Z buffer, which is kind of beyond me. I don't know how to explain it properly. You can read about the Z buffer more on Wikipedia, but the idea here is that it already takes depth from the game, so your graphics card isn't having to work overtime to render two images twice. Now, the downside is that not all games store a whole lot of depth information in the Z buffer in such a way that is properly usable by 3D hardware, so in that sense, you're not going to get the same kind of 3D effect that you would get when you're running it side by side and in other type of options. So Power 3D can help you if you're having performance issues or if you have a lower end machine, but ultimately it's not the most ideal situation for rendering 3D. So those are kind of the settings that you've got there. It's really good to actually mess around with them and see what you can do to kind of improve the performance in your machine, and ultimately everyone's going to have a different perception of 3D, so those settings will help you quite a bit. So what you have here is what kind of display you have. So if you do have one of those displays, such as like an NVIDIA display or an IZ 3D display, using FPR is actually pretty good, because then you're going to be able to use it with your 3D glasses. But in this particular case, since we're not using 3D glasses and since the software doesn't support and my monitor doesn't support FPR, you're actually not going to want to use this. This is more for traditional, old school 3D that uses either polarized glasses or it uses active shutter glasses. Side by side is what I'm using right now. It works just fine. It's not really the most ideal way to render the games that are not natively supportive of 3D. So any type of video game that was not initially written to have 3D support is not really going to work super great with this. You'll notice a lot of bugs in the UI, you'll notice a lot of issues in the way that the game runs and performs, so this really just isn't the ideal way of doing this. There are other mods that make the games run in proper 3D. I'm not going to cover them in this video, but you can look those up yourself. There's things like the Helix mod, which makes your game that normally doesn't support 3D run in 3D, which may be a good combination to use with Tridef for the game.